It was an April morning, warm and green, when I boarded in Strasbourg the train that was to take me to Colmar. The Alsatian route is not a long journey, barely an hour, but it's one of the richest for atmosphere. The man sitting across from me was older, at least my age, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to be the color of the sky that morning. Grey-blue, without color, but not empty. He wore a simple linen shirt, and his hands rested quietly on his legs. "Beautiful weather," I said. The man nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, and his accent was hard to place. Neither quite German nor quite French, but something in between. Alsatian German with French overlaid, or French with German guttural sounds. The voice itself was a border. "This is the best weather here," he continued. "When spring comes and the valley isn't hot yet, in this moment, everything is possible." The train began to move. Strasbourg disappeared. We were at once in a landscape that surprised me. Already at the edge of the vineyards, I saw apple plantations, incredible order and beauty. Alsace is one of the most agricultural regions of Europe. Every piece of land is used, planted, cared for. But it's not clinical or artificial. It's done lovingly, by hand, over generations. The man looked out at the landscape, and his face showed no surprise. He saw this daily, or at least regularly. "I live in this valley," he said after a while. "My whole life. My grandparents too, and their grandparents, long before." He paused, and I saw him searching for words, not because language failed him, but because what he wanted to say was too large for simple sentences. "The border," he said then simply. "You don't see it on the map, not really. Here is French, there is German. But the river, the mountains, they know no border. The vines don't, the apples don't. Only people." He pointed at a sign rushing past. The sign was bilingual, Obernay/Oberreinheim. One name, two languages, one place. "My father spoke German," the man continued. "My mother French. In my head, these two languages aren't separate. They're one, like two waters flowing down the same river." I asked which language he preferred. He laughed, not bitterly, but with genuine pleasure. "That's like asking whether I prefer my right or left eye," he said. "I need both to see. Alsace lies precisely on this border, and that's not a problem. That's the gift. That's what makes us unique." The train passed through a village. The houses were half-timbered with window boxes full of flowers, red, white, pink, yellow. The church had an onion dome, German or French, it was unclear. "Kaisersberg," said the man, pointing to a place in the distance. "That's a village, about 30 kilometers from here. The old town is medieval, very beautiful. My grandfather was from there. He spoke with an accent I only understood later. It wasn't German, not French, but a mix, a language that exists only in this region." The man pointed at the mountains. "The Vosges. On one side is France, on the other is Germany. But here, in the valley, we're ourselves." I tried to understand what he was telling me. It wasn't just a geographical phenomenon. It was something deeper. A place where two cultures had so permeated each other that they'd become a new identity. Alsace wasn't France and wasn't Germany. It was itself. And the people living there weren't French or German. They were Alsatian. "You'll understand," said the man thoughtfully, "that this valley is a paradox. The borders have been drawn very strictly here, by politicians, by armies, by history. But nature here, culture here, they know nothing of these borders. The vines grow across borders. The lakes know nothing of borders. The people here, they simply live, and they're whole, not divided." The train fell into a gentle rhythm. We passed small stations: Châtenois, Kinsheim, Redwier. Each name a mixture, each place an example. A large stork sat on a roof, enormous and majestic, white with black wings. The man pointed at it. "The stork is also without borders," he said. "He flies from here to there, and it doesn't matter to him which side is French and which is German. For him, it's all one valley, all one home." We sat in silence. It was a good silence, the kind of silence where two people are together and don't need to speak. The man stared out at the landscape rushing past. His eyes followed the rows of vines, the apple trees, the villages. Sometimes he pointed at something, a house, a tower, a field chapel, and I saw that he knew every detail, every story, every memory. "I've crossed this border 7 times, the man said suddenly. "Not physically, mind you. I've always stayed in the same places, but the border has crossed over me. In the war, after the war, with the European Union, with the modern world. Each time the border shifted, redefined, rewritten. But the valley has always remained the same." I asked what he thought about the future. The man shrugged. "The borders will continue to be borders," he said. "That's the nature of borders. They must define, separate, control. But here, in this valley, people will continue to live on both sides, speak, love. Vines will continue to grow, because vines don't need passports. Storks will continue to fly, because the air has no checkpoint." The train slowed. Colmar was approaching. I saw the silhouette of the old city, the towers, the bridges, the canals. A city like out of a fairy tale, old-fashioned and beautiful. The man leaned back and closed his eyes. But before he did, I saw his face. Not old or young, but timeless. A face that carried this valley within it, the spring, the borders, the languages, all mixed into one complete identity. "You should visit Colmar if you have time," the man said, before he closed his eyes. "Walk through the old town. See the houses, the little rivers, the churches. Talk to the people. Ask them if they're French or German. Watch their eyes answer before their mouths speak. An answer that belongs to both languages." The man became quiet, not sleeping, but calm, withdrawn into himself. The train passed the vineyards glowing in the sun. The blossoms opened to new life. A raven flew overhead, or perhaps it was a crow. The sky was perfectly blue, and the mountains were green, and the plain below was colored with flowers and fruit and hope. I leaned against the window and observed the landscape. I didn't see the borders, not really. I saw a valley stretching out, infinite and beautiful and broken at once. I saw people living, despite or perhaps because of the borders. I saw vines growing and apples ripening and storks flying, and everything was one. The man beside me breathed calmly. The train moved gently, rhythmically. Colmar came closer and closer. In a few moments he would stand and get out, and perhaps I'd never see him again. But the words he'd said to me would remain, about borders, about identity, about the way the world really works when you don't look at the lines on a map. And as I drifted away, my eyes grew heavy, my head grew light. I still thought about borders, about languages, about laughter that speaks no language and vines that need no passports, and two people on a train who spoke together without really speaking, and yet understood. And the man beside me rested, and the landscape rolled past, and the border was still there, but also not, and Alsace was whole and broken at once, and the sun shone on the vines, and the blossoms opened, and everything was beautiful. Everything was possible. And I was not quite awake, not quite asleep, but somewhere in between, where there are no borders, where everything flows, where languages mix like water, and words become images, and images become feelings, and feelings become this warm, safe place that's less than Colmar Station, but more than the whole world. There are people who look at the world and see what I see. Railway stations, landscapes, other travelers. And there are people who look at the same world and see something entirely different. I met someone like that on the route from Brigg to Zermatt. It was spring, early May, and we were traveling up the Mattertal Railway, that marvelous narrow-gauge line that climbs the gorge like a lizard up a cliff face. I never thought this journey would change my understanding of seeds. She sat across from me, a woman in her mid to late 50s perhaps, with the hands of someone who works. Not factory work, not housework, something with the earth. Under her fingernails was dark, truly dark, the sort of dark that doesn't wash away. She carried a bag made of cloth, hand-woven looking, from pale linen. And as the train began to move, she started taking things from it. Little packets, paper envelopes, each with a handwritten label. I saw the names as she sorted them. Edelweiss Pushkin, 2,750 meters. Silberwurz, 2,100 meters. Alpine Forget-Me-Not. These tiny flowers, you see, that you hardly notice when you're driving up the Alps. People photograph the Matterhorn, the gleaming rocks, the snowfields. But this woman, she had the eye for the invisible. She sorted her seeds by elevation. That's not something you just do. That's passion. That's a kind of madness, a beautiful madness. I couldn't resist asking. And she was happy to tell me. Not in the way people who like to talk speak, but in the way people speak who have finally found someone who truly listens. Her name was Annette. She wasn't a farmer or a botanist by profession. She was a teacher, retired from Bern. But for 20 years, she'd been doing this, hiking into the Alps, scattering seeds of alpine flowers in places where they'd been lost or never been at all. People think the mountains never change, she said. But they do. The flowers disappear because the paths are destroyed, because sheep no longer graze, because we stop looking. She opened one of the paper envelopes. Virginia was written on it, and showed me the seeds, tiny, almost like powder. "This plant," she said, "grows only on wet rocks near springs. It needs exactly the right mixture: moisture, shade, stone." She knew the requirements by heart, not from textbooks, from decades of watching. The railway was now climbing through the gorge, the Mattertall Gorge, with waterfalls leaping from the rocks and bridges so high and thin you look down and feel dizzy. She barely noticed. She was elsewhere. She painted me a mental picture of every meadow she knew. "The meadow near Grindelwald at 1900 meters," she said. "20 years ago I planted alpine asters there. Now there's a whole field of them. Nobody knows I did it." That was it. That was her whole answer to the world. She changed it, but not for fame, not to see her name in it. She planted flowers in places where people would see them, but nobody would ever know who had planted them. She would grow old, then older, then no longer be here. But the flowers, they would remain. Perhaps, if the conditions were right, if the rain came, if no wanderer trampled the meadow. She opened another envelope. "Saxifrage," she said. "A classic. But this one, Saxifraga stenopetala, now grows in only 3 places in Switzerland. 3! Do you know how sad that is?" She looked at me, and it wasn't dramatic or accusatory. It was just sad, like someone recognizing a disease and knowing the healing will be slow. She had a handful of packets of this saxifrage. "I scatter it everywhere the conditions fit. Most won't germinate, perhaps 1 in 1,000. But 1 is better than none." The train was approaching Zermatt. The gorge opened out to meadows, and the Matterhorn appeared beyond the trees. Suddenly, unexpectedly, like something long hidden. Annette saw it and nodded, not surprised. She knew this moment. She'd traveled this route 100 times, perhaps 1,000, each time with new seeds, each time with a new plan. I had to ask her. I had to. "Annette," I said, "you've been doing this for 20 years now. You scatter these seeds, you leave, you don't know if they'll grow. How do you bear it?" She laughed. It was a gentle laugh, not bitter. "I bear it," she said, "because I know it's right. And I bear it because—" She paused. "Because I'm only a seed myself that may or may not grow. And I'm grateful that my mother planted me without knowing how I would turn out." It was like someone opening a door to something I couldn't name. She continued, "Have you ever planted something and then left without knowing if it would grow?" I thought about it. No, I've never planted anything. But suddenly I understood that she wasn't just talking about flowers. She was talking about words, actions, decisions, all the things we scatter into the world and never know whether they'll take root. The train slowed. Zermatt, the little mountain town where the line ends, where hikers get out to climb the final stretch of the Matterhorn. Or, in this case, where a woman gets out with a bag full of seeds to sow for people she doesn't know, in a future she won't see. She stood up. She arranged her envelopes back into the bag, gently, respectfully, as if they weren't seeds, but precious objects. "Where are you going?" I asked. "Up," she said simply. "There's a meadow up there, at 2,400 meters that ought to be full of flowers, but it's nearly empty and going to scatter seeds. I saw the age in her hands, the strength still there, but also the fragility. "That's a long hike," I said. She shrugged. "It's spring. Everything necessary is there. Sun, melting snow, moisture. I know every spring, every rock. I'll find my way." She left the train. I watched her go, stepping out onto the platform, the bag slung over her shoulder, into Zermatt, then up the street, growing smaller and smaller, until she was gone. But I knew she would keep going, higher still, to the meadow, and she would scatter seeds there, one after another, not knowing if even a dozen would germinate. And for her, that was enough. I sat on the bench for a long time afterward, thinking. I thought about her question, "Have you ever planted something and then left?" I replayed our meeting and suddenly understood that she'd shown me more than saxifrage and Virginia. She'd shown me the heart of something most people forget, that it's not about the outcome, that the sowing itself is the act, that believing is enough. You know, I've met many people who speak much of their successes, but Annette spoke of things nobody would ever acknowledge. She worked in silence, without witness. The alpine aster meadow would bloom, and nobody would ever know who planted it there. And that was enough for her. I wondered if I could ever be like that, if I could ever work without someone watching. And as I wondered that, I understood that Annette hadn't just told me about seeds. She'd told me about a whole life. A life that is quiet, but that changes everything. The dusk is deep now. The mountains around grow black. Only the Matterhorn, still caught by the last rays, glows like a memory, like something I know but can no longer see. And I imagine it. She is now on the meadow, at 2,400 meters. She kneels down, takes a handful of earth. She scatters seeds. 1, 2. Perhaps she says something. Perhaps she repeats it dozens of times until the bag is empty. And then she leaves. She may see this meadow in autumn when the flowers bloom, or perhaps not. But it doesn't matter anymore, because the work is done, because the seed is planted, because she has done what needed doing, quite regardless of what comes. As I tell you this, I can still hear the rustle of her paper envelopes, the seeds in my memory, so small, so light, and yet so full of possibility. And slowly, my story becomes a seed too. I'm scattering it into you, and I won't see if it takes root. But I let it go, hopeful, into the darkness. Your eyes grow heavy. The mountains disappear into the night. Everything grows still, and you sink down into the earth itself, where everything waits. Sometimes the world shows you something strange. Not supernatural, not dramatic, but strange enough that it doesn't let go of you. The man I'm about to tell you about was one of those people. I met him on a train from Münster to Osnabrück, a completely flat route, Westphalian, nothing but fields and small villages as far as the eye can see. And this old man sat next to me, and though he had every reason to be bored, he was fascinated, completely fascinated. He was at least 70, perhaps older, deep brown from the sun, the sort of tan that comes from years, decades beneath the sun, not from holidays, from life on the water. His hands were large and scarred, with marks from ropes and salt water, and even in my train on a flat German railway, he held on as if standing at the rail. It wasn't conscious, it was memory in the body. His name was Ernst. He'd been a ship's captain, not just any ships, but large ones, cargo ships, container ships, all over the world, mostly in the Pacific. 40 years, he told me, 40 years on the water. His wife was Westphalian from Munster. When he retired in the early 60s, he moved back to her, inland, away from the sea. That was 10 years ago. He lived there now, and he'd imagined it would be simple. But that but was invisible and everywhere. As the train began to move and we looked out at the Westphalian flatlands, endless fields, grain fields from horizon to horizon, I saw his gaze change. He leaned forward. He didn't look tired, not bored. He looked like someone seeing something others cannot see. And then I understood. He was seeing the ocean. The flat Westphalia was the Pacific for him. I asked if he missed the sea. He shrugged, not lightly, but thoughtfully. Miss, he repeated. That's a big word. I wasn't missed by something, but yes, I still see it. And then he began to tell me about a night in the Pacific, somewhere between Hawaii and Japan, perhaps 30 years ago. It was a full moon night, he said, and the sea was like glass, completely flat, no wind, no waves. The ship was a large cargo steamer with a crew of 15 men, all sleeping except him awake on the bridge, as was routine. You couldn't say where the water ended and the sky began, he said. It was all one thing. The ship and me and the universe. Everything was one thing, you see? The moon was bright enough that I couldn't see the bow that was the ship. It looked like I was traveling over nothing, like I was floating. He paused and looked out at the fields, where the sun was setting now. The fields turned orange and red, and the air between them grew grainy. And now, he said quietly, now I travel through Westphalia and see the same thing. I thought he was mad. Westphalia looks nothing like the Pacific. The fields are green, brown, golden, depending on the season. They have hedges, trees, little villages with church spires. And yet, as he spoke, I saw what he saw. The fields stretch out like a sea. The light upon them makes waves. The horizon is so far away it's impossible to hold that distance in your eye. Exactly like on water. I take this route all the time, Ernst said. Münster to Osnabrück or back. My wife thinks I'm mad, but I go, and I see the Pacific. I'm back there in that night at the wheel. The ship moves so gently, and the light of the moon, or now the sun at sunset, does the same thing. The world becomes a surface, simple, endless, calm. I saw his hands gripping the armrest. They held on firmly, but not nervously, with routine, with knowledge. These hands had stood thousands of hours at the wheel. They knew how to hold on to something vibrating, something beneath the water. And now, on this bench, They held fabric that moved like the motion of a ship. "The first week when I arrived here," he said, "I thought I would die. My heart was so tight. The world was so small, so solid, so bounded. A land with borders, not endless like the sea." He looked at me, and his eyes were clear. "But then I understood. The world isn't different. I am different. I see differently. And when I see how the fields stretch and stretch with no boundary except the invisible boundary of distance, then I can breathe." The train was now traveling through the golden hour. Everything was light and shadow. The fields cast long shadows. The church towers of the villages were silhouetted. And I saw that Ernst had tilted his head back and his eyes were closed. But he wasn't asleep. I could see he was still traveling in the Pacific beneath the moon on a flat sea with no boundaries. Other passengers boarded and left. The train grew fuller, then emptier. Ernst remained seated and smelled of salt water. That's strange, isn't it? A man who'd been away from the sea for 10 years, and he still smelt of it. I didn't ask him whether it was imagination or whether his body carried salt water through him, everywhere. I didn't want to destroy the secret. Perhaps the whole Westphalian journey was for him a kind of meditation, a return to the water through the mind. I thought about his life. 40 years on the sea. That's a whole existence. Generation after generation. Every day the rocking, the salt, the infinity. And then, suddenly, Münster. Landlocked, bounded. A wife who loved him but couldn't understand. A land that was flat as an ocean floor, but without water. No wonder he took this train, again and again, searching for something he would never find, but at least he would search. Eventually, he didn't say much more. But before we reached Osnabrück, he leaned over and said, "If you ever lose the feeling that the world is large, just travel through fields and see them as sea. The world is as large as your heart can see it. Not larger, not smaller. Exactly that large." Then he leaned back, and his eyes grew small and drowsy. His head sank to the side. He finally slept. But not in the train, I think. He slept on the ship, beneath the moon, on the gentle Pacific. In Osnabrück, he got out. I saw him walk along the platform, this old man with his swaying seaman's gait, as if the platform swayed beneath his feet. A woman waited for him there, middle-aged, Westphalian-looking, with a delighted face. She took his arm, not tenderly but practically, but with familiarity, and led him away. And I knew he would travel again tomorrow or next week, again through these fields, searching for the sea. And that was exactly right. But now, as I tell you this, I'm back in that train. The evening has grown deeper, and the fields outside are no longer green, but violet and dark blue. And when I look at them, I see the sea too. I see the way Ernst sees them. A surface, endless, gentle, touching the horizon where sky and world become one thing. The train moves so quietly. There's no sensation of speed, only of gentle motion through space and time. I close my eyes, and I'm also on a ship. The deck vibrates gently beneath my shoes. The light is golden red and becomes dark blue. The Pacific doesn't need to be seen, only felt. The rocking is real, and an old man with salt water in his breath sits next to me and smiles. "You see it now," he says. "You see that the whole world is a sea, if you know how to look." The darkness becomes complete. The fields are gone. Only the horizon remains, invisible but present. The train grows slower, not physically, but in time. The seconds grow larger. The moments stretch out. And I'm lying now, not on a seat, but on water. On the great, gentle Pacific, beneath a moon so bright I see both nothing and everything at once. The heartbeat becomes the beat of waves. Slowly, ever more slowly, until I no longer know if I'm awake or asleep. There are moments that aren't planned, that happen to you without warning. You're sitting in your ordinary train with its ordinary lights in an ordinary hour of an ordinary evening. And then, simply then, everything changes. The lights go out. Not slowly, not with warning, just gone. And it's dark. So dark that you can't even see your hand if you hold it in front of your face. That's the story I want to tell you. It was in the Zillertal, on the narrow railway from Jenbach to Meerhofen in early January. The Zillertal in winter is not for the faint-hearted. The railway is narrow, a gauge of only 1 meter, and it crawls up through a gorge between mountainsides that are steep and dark and covered with snow. It was late afternoon already, perhaps 4 o'clock, and the sun was gone. The sky was deep blue, not black, but dark enough that everything looked grey. But the snow reflected what light remained, and everything was white and silver. I was sitting in the compartment, not full, but not empty. A couple of tourists, an old man, a woman with bags. Normal people who needed to be somewhere. The lights in the train were warm and electric, orange and yellow, against the blue darkness outside. I was reading a book, or trying to. Truth be told, I stared out the window at the snowy fields more than I read. The Zillertal is too beautiful to ignore. And then, I didn't notice it at first, but the longer I think about it, the more clearly I see it. There was a very, very brief moment when the light changed. Not went out, but flickered. That was all. A flicker. Like when chance will have a cloud pass in front of the sun, but inside, not out. A flicker of electricity. And then everything was black. Not dark grey, not dark blue. Black. The complete blackness that comes when there's no light source at all. The train still had enough power to move. I could feel the rolling beneath my feet, slow but sure. But the lights were all gone. The compartment suddenly became invisible. And I couldn't see where I was. My first thought wasn't fear. That was strange. It could have been. Darkness, train, mountains outside. But it wasn't. My first thought was surprise, openness, as if the universe said, "Wait, breathe, look." Fear came later. Not from me, but from the others. Someone gasped. A woman said, "Oh!" A man called for the conductor. But these reactions were quick, and then there was a kind of silence. Not quiet. Silence is an active thing. Silence is when everyone decides to sit together in the darkness and breathe. The train continued to roll. I could see, well, not see, but sense, that there were still people in the compartment. I could hear breathing, not nervous, but long, deep. We 5 or 6, or however many we were breathing together. The train swayed gently like a ship, and we sat in the darkness and breathed. That was all. Outside the windows, and this was the wonderful thing, there was still light. The snow was silver, even without the sun, because the sky still had colors, and this snow reflected into the compartment. Not enough to read, but enough to see outlines of people. I could see the old man, not his face, but its shape. I could see the woman with the bags, her silhouette against the window. We sat there, visible and invisible all at once. It was strangely beautiful. Something happened then. Not something you can describe, but something you can feel. The old man next to me said something, just one word. "Beautiful," he said, in German, but spoken like a question, like he was asking, "Isn't this beautiful?" And someone, a woman, I think the one with bags, answered, "Yes, yes, very." And that was all. No more fear, no panic, just an acknowledgement that something extraordinary had happened. And it wasn't dreadful. It was interesting. We sat like that. I don't know how long. Time is strange when there's no clock, nothing electric, nothing to measure. It could have been 10 minutes. It could have been 15. Probably it was less than 20. But it felt longer. Not boring longer, but flowing longer. Like time became water and flowed slowly. The train continued through the Zillertal. I could feel it turning curves. Centrifugal force pulled us to the side. I could feel it climbing. I had the sensation in my stomach of the train going up a hill. But I could see nothing. Only the silhouettes and the glimmering of snow outside, which was grey and silver and dissolved into the darkness of the mountains. I thought, this is it. This is what the earth was like before electricity. This is what people experienced for most of human history. The darkness. No lights. Just the darkness and what you could feel. And it's not terrible. It's not even lonely. The man next to me is breathing. The woman with bags is still there. The train beneath us is still there. We're not lost. Then, it wasn't sudden, but it was noticeable. The light came back. The compartment became yellow and orange again. The lights were on again. And everything that was dark became clear again. I could see the color of the seat. I could see the faces. The old man next to me was roughly my age, with wrinkles and fine hair. The woman with bags was perhaps 60, with a red hat. Other passengers I hadn't really seen, hadn't literally seen, emerged as if the darkness had created them and the light dissolved them again. And then something very human happened. Everyone blinked. Not because we were blind, but because the brightness was too abrupt. It was too much. The eyes needed a second to adjust. And while we all blinked in this strange synchronicity, we looked at each other. Really looked. The old man next to me nodded his head, a nod as if to say, "We shared that." And I nodded back. After that, it was as if a spell had broken. People started talking. "A short circuit," someone said. "The electronics on this railway are old," one of the tourists said. Normal conversations. Normal world. The blackness was over. But it wasn't over. It was still there in the memory, still in the air, still in the eyes of people who had sat and shared it. We'd looked together into nothing, and we came back with something new in our hearts. The old man next to me bent over. "This doesn't happen often," he said quietly. "The darkness. Real darkness." I nodded. We didn't speak again, but I knew we'd understood each other. Not from words, but from the breath that had been shared. From feeling the same thing without seeing. That's a kind of intimacy not many people experience. I thought about how quickly we forget. The darkness, the silence, the simplicity of it. In a few minutes, everyone would put away this memory like an old coat. The tourists would talk about other things. The woman with bags would look back at her book. But for those 10 or 15 minutes, we were something else. We were people sitting together in the darkness, without fear. The rest of the journey was uneventful. The train arrived in Meyerhofen as it should. People got out. The old man stood up, said goodbye to me with a nod, and left. I never saw him again. But I know he remembers it, just as I remember it. The compartment, the light that was gone, the darkness that was beautiful because it was shared. And somewhere in Meyerhofen, somewhere in his further life, this old man sits and thinks of this night when the lights go out. And he's not alone with the memory. I'm there too. Now, as I tell you this, I'm traveling through the Zillertal again. It's dark outside. The snow is barely visible, only light patches on black mountain. The lights in the train are on, bright and orange, and I'm grateful for them. But I know it could go dark, that it could happen any moment, anywhere, any time. And if it does, I won't be frightened. I'll breathe. I'll feel my fellow travelers, and I'll know that darkness isn't separation, but connection. The lights are growing dimmer already. That's not real. They're not dimming, but my awareness is dimming them. Or perhaps it's the Zillertal growing darker, the mountains drawing nearer. The train is slowing. The voices of the other passengers are growing quieter. Everything is growing quieter, softer. And I sit here, in this darkness that isn't dark, because I'm not alone. And I breathe, and breathe, and sink away into the silence. I want to tell you something so simple, it's almost not worth being a story. But it is. It is a story because it is life. And life is always a story, when you look carefully. This story happened on the train from Marburg to Gießen on an autumn morning when the mist still lay over the Lahn Valley and everything was golden and grey and very, very still. It wasn't about great events. It was only about a woman peeling potatoes and me watching. I was sitting a few seats away from her. I shouldn't have been looking directly at her. That's not polite. But the train was half empty, and my eye fell on her the way the eye falls when something unusual seeks your attention. And the unusual thing was this. She sat with a paper bag between her knees, and she was peeling potatoes. Not that peeling potatoes itself is strange. People peel potatoes everywhere. In kitchens, at markets, on station platforms. But not on a train. Not usually. She had a knife, a large knife, not small, not uncertain. And on her lap lay a newspaper, and on the newspaper lay potatoes, one beside the other. And as I watched, she took a potato, laid the blade against it, and in a single flowing motion peeled the whole thing. The skin fell onto the newspaper. It was one long spiral, not several pieces, but one. The entire potato peeled in a single skin. That's what fascinated me. The perfectness of it. The meditation of it. She wasn't hurried. She wasn't impatient. She took a potato up, one, and laid it down. Took the next, two, and laid it down. Took the next, three. I counted. I can't explain it, but I counted how many potatoes she peeled. 7, 8, 9. The rhythm was steady. The skins were all the same length, no wasted material, but also no rushed scraping. Just the blade under the skin, a slight pressure, a turn of the wrist, and the skin spiraled away. It was like a dance, but for the hands. I couldn't see how old she was. She wore a long jacket and a scarf, and her face wasn't turned toward me. But her hands were old. Not withered, but worked. The nails were short and no jewelry. Just these hands that knew what to do. Not watching, not thinking, just knowing. The Larne Valley glided past outside, and the train was completely still. That's strange, isn't it? Trains are never completely still. There's always a rolling, a hum of motors, a rush of wind. But on this morning, everything was muffled. The mist outside was so thick I barely saw movement. The train could have been standing still for all I knew. It was just the potato peeler and me and the gentle rolling. 10 potatoes. 11. 12. She had a plastic bag beside her now, and the peeled potatoes, white and raw, went in. The skins formed a pile on the newspaper. I wondered where they'd go. Would she simply throw them away? Or take them with her? Perhaps to compost. Perhaps these were her potatoes, and she'd cook them on a Sunday, and a family would sit and eat without knowing that these hands, these exact, rhythmic hands, had prepared them. I tried to imagine where she was going. Gießen, presumably, if she got out there. What would she do in Gießen? Go to the university? She didn't look like a student. Perhaps someone who worked there. Or perhaps a grandmother visiting. The potatoes were surely for a stew. I could see that in the way she handled the peeled potatoes, respectfully, as if they were precious things. 13. 14. 15. She wasn't slowing. The rhythm remained constant. 1. Peel. 2. Peel. 3. Peel. It was hypnotic. I couldn't look away. Other passengers came and went. Someone held a newspaper. Someone else drank from a bottle. But the potato peeler continued, undisturbed. She didn't look up. She looked at the newspaper, and her hands knew what to do. The mist outside was now so thick the windows were milky. The Lahn, the river the train follows, was somewhere out there but not visible. The whole world outside had vanished. There was only the train, this small world on rails. And in this world, a woman peeled potatoes, and I sat and watched. And that was enough. I thought about the millions of people doing something equally important in that moment. People making beds, people combing hair, people doing the same thing, repeating the same rhythm, and who would never expect anyone to watch them and understand that it's beautiful. But it is. Life is in these moments. The meaning is in the hands that know what to do. 20 potatoes. 21. 22. The newspaper under her was now very full of skins. She took a page, lifted it up, not suddenly, but carefully, and tipped the skins into another bag. Then she laid a fresh sheet down, and without breaking rhythm, she took the next potato. 23. That's mastery, I thought. That's what it means to know something. Not spectacular, not quick, not remarkable to others, but perfect in the small. The potato peeler knew potatoes. She knew the blade. She knew the pressure, the angles, the speed. She could do it without thinking because she'd practiced 100 times, 1,000 times, 100 times with 1,000 potatoes. And now the 1,001st potato was a work of art that no one would ever acknowledge. The train was approaching Gießen. I could feel the train accelerate, not really faster, but with more intention. And shortly after, I saw the first houses through the mist. Dark brick. The place would become visible again. The world outside would solidify, and the potato peeler would have to leave. She peeled the last potato, 27 or so, I'd stopped counting, and stood up. She was carrying 4 bags now, one with potatoes, one with skins, one with the newspaper, one for her empty hand. She looked like she did this often, shopping, traveling, peeling potatoes, preparing food. A life that consists of movements repeated until they become gentle. That's a life I admire, without the woman ever knowing. I tried to imagine her name. Was she a grandmother? A mother? Someone unmarried, cooking for herself? How long had she been peeling potatoes? Since childhood? Since she was married? Was peeling potatoes a joy to her, or just a necessary task she'd perfected to shorten the time? I'll never know. But that didn't make the observation any less significant. She walked to the exit, and I watched her go out into Gießen. I couldn't see where she went. The platform was full of people getting off the train and going in directions I didn't know. But I knew the potatoes had a destination. A pot. A stew, a Sunday dinner with family or friends or alone. And this meal, the result, no one would know it had been prepared with this gentleness, this rhythm, this attention. But she would know. She would cook the potatoes and serve the meal. And that would be enough. But I know too. I was there. And I saw it. The potato peeler, whose name I don't know, peeled potatoes on the train from Marburg to Gießen on an autumn morning when the mist lay over the Lahn Valley and everything was golden and strangely still. She did it with a perfection most people wouldn't see. And that's all right. That's even better. That's more beautiful. Beautiful things don't need to be admired to be beautiful. They're beautiful because they're done right. And I was there, and I saw it. And that's a piece of luck I didn't deserve, but I take it. And I know. And that's all that counts. Now, as I tell you this, I still see her hands in front of me. The blade spirals, spirals, spirals. The skin becomes a line. The potato becomes white and raw and ready. And the train travels on through the mist, and the whole world is potatoes and hands and silence and gentleness. Everything is very quiet. The Larn River flows invisibly. Autumn is everywhere. And I'm tired, so tired. And my eyes grow heavy, and I lean my head back, and the skins fall, fall, fall into sleep. It was a grey February day when I noticed the man who stepped onto the train to Solothurn. I was already sitting by the window, and the Biel-Solothurn line was to carry us through the Jura foothills, past bare forests and towering cliff faces that looked particularly harsh this winter. The man sat across from me, and I saw at once that he wasn't simply a passenger. His hands were unusual. Large hands with fine scars, the fingers slightly curved, like someone who's done precise work his whole life. Fine white dust clung to his sleeves, gleaming in the light, almost like flour, but harder, more mineral. "Glazier," he said, and nodded to me, polite and calm. He wore a dark wool overcoat, and under his arm he held a flat package carefully wrapped, as if transporting a precious treasure. I would later learn that was exactly what it was. His whole profession, you might say, lay in that wrapping. The train began to move, and the first houses of Biel disappeared behind us. "Do you travel this route often?" I asked. "The way you do when two people sit alone in a compartment, and silence hasn't yet found a name." The man smiled, just briefly. "Every week," he said. "I work on the old churches up in the villages. Windows, you know. Glass is my life. I'm a glazier." He didn't say it proudly, but like a craftsman simply describing what he does. His dialect was a soft mixture of Bernese German and French, typical for this region, where languages flow into each other like the landscape itself. I asked how long he'd been doing it. 40 years, he said, thoughtfully, and looked out at the fields gliding past, brown and cold under the winter sky. 40 years I've tried to make myself invisible. You see, that's the secret of a good glazier. Nobody should see the glass. You should be able to see through it without noticing it. Glass is good when it doesn't exist. He paused briefly, and I realized he was speaking to himself in that moment, not to me. Outside, the Jura foothills drifted past, chalk-white cliff faces between bare beaches, and the light was as grey and clear as only February light can be. The light that hides nothing and beautifies nothing, that shows things as they are. The glazier liked this light, I could see. He looked out as if the light were a tool he knew. But then, he continued, and his expression changed. Then I started working on old windows, church windows from the 17th, 18th centuries, and suddenly I understood something different. The best old glass, it's not invisible. Old glass, it wants to be seen. It has waves in it, bubbles, streaks. It's alive. Without asking, He unwrapped the package. A piece of antique glass lay in his hands, no larger than my own palm, but perfectly ground. When he held it against the light of the window, I immediately understood what he meant. Hundreds of tiny imperfections dance within it. Bubbles that look like pearls, waves that break and displace the light. "Look," he said quietly. "That's real treasure. You can feel that someone made this glass. A person with fire and breath." I asked if he restored or collected such glass. "Both," he said. "I restore the windows in the churches. Sometimes I have to replace pieces that are too damaged, but when I can, I leave the old glass in place. And if a window can't be saved, I sometimes take a small piece, like this one here, to remember. To remember what was. To remember the hands that made it 300 years ago in a workshop that no longer exists." The train fell into a rhythm, the soothing click of the wheels on the rails. We passed small Swiss stations I didn't know, with red and white lanterns and benches where nobody sat. The Glazier told me about a church in Savon where he was just reworking the south-facing windows. 300 years old, he said, and the concrete around them has crumbled over the last decade. The glass survived, but the stone is giving up. He shook his head, not in disbelief, but thoughtfully. "The most fragile things last the longest," he said. "Strange, isn't it?" "The paradox is," he continued, and here he suddenly became more philosophical, "that the best glass is the kind you don't see, but then you have nothing left to see through. That's the contradiction I live in. I spend my whole life trying to make myself invisible, and the most beautiful moments of my work are when the glass is visible, when it's human, flawed, alive." In that moment, I understood that this man wasn't just talking about glass. He was talking about his life, about precision and silence, about the dream of being perfect, and the realization that perfection is dead. Old glass with its bubbles was worth more than any new pane that was flawless and empty. The train swayed gently. We were now deeper in the Jura, and the mountainsides grew steeper. "Do you have children?" I asked. He nodded. "A son. He never wanted to be a glazier. Too slow," he said. "Too much care for too little money. Now he works in an office, at a computer, doing something I don't really understand. But perhaps he's right." He looked down at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "These hands are what I have left," he said. "The work is what I have left. That's enough." We sat silently for a while. The Glazier carefully wrapped his piece of antique glass again, corner by corner, slowly, as if tucking in a child. I watched how lovingly he did it, how he folded the cloth, every movement familiar and intentional, as if he'd wrapped exactly this piece of glass in exactly this cloth 1,000 times. This was someone who'd lived with care, with attention to every detail, with the unshakable conviction that craftsmanship means take time, be present, let your hands know. "The concrete crumbles, but the glass remains," he said finally, almost to himself. "I'm growing old, and my eyes are getting weaker, but I can still see what's good and what isn't. That's my gift, or perhaps my curse. I'm no longer sure." A smile played around his lips. Not sad, but somehow reconciled. The train had grown slower. Solothurn was approaching. I saw the old town, the arcades, the old fortress up on the hill. The Glazier stood up slowly and took his package. "Thank you," he said. "It's nice when someone listens. That doesn't happen often on trains." At the door, he turned once more. The cold February wind streamed in, and the light from outside struck his face, hard and clear. "The glass wants to be seen," he said, quietly, almost to himself. "That's the true work. Not making it invisible, but letting it be alive." Then he was gone, out into the grey day, and the door closed behind him. He stepped out, and I leaned back against the window. The sun was low in the sky, grey and cold, and the light fell diagonally into the compartment, just as he'd described it. February light that hides nothing. I closed my eyes and thought about old windows, about bubbles in glass, about hands that for 40 years have done the same work and can still wonder. The rhythm of the train became slower, more soothing. My thoughts grew heavy. I imagined the old Glazier now leaving the station at Solothurn, his package under his arm, on his way to a church that's waiting for him. Or perhaps he's already back in the train, heading home to Biel, ready for the next day, the next work. His hands are resting, perhaps, but not really. They can't be still. They must work, be present, careful. And as I drifted away, I still thought of that small piece of glass with its fine bubbles, the light dancing within, the 100 years living there. And eventually, I wasn't fully awake anymore, but somewhere in between, in the light itself, hovering like a bubble in glass, warm and safe. The June day was so clear and bright that the windows of the train shone like transparent water. I boarded at Rapperswil, and immediately I noticed the man with the camera, not because he was photographing, but because he was pointedly not photographing. He sat across from me, an old analog camera round his neck, black and worn like a faithful companion, but his hands rested motionless on his legs. The train would take us along the Zurich Lake, one of the most beautiful routes in Switzerland. Yet this man with the camera kept it untouched. I couldn't help myself. I had to ask. "Beautiful camera," I said politely. The man smiled, not surprised, but as if he'd been waiting for the question. "Yes," he answered. "I've had it for 30 years. Leica M3, my best tool. But I hardly use it anymore." His voice was calm, thoughtful, with a hint of something I couldn't quite place at first. Perhaps sadness, perhaps liberation. "Hardly any more?" I asked, bewildered. He nodded and looked out the window, where the lake had just become visible, glittering and blindingly beautiful. "I was a professional photographer," he said. 20 years. Traveling, mountains, people, moments. I photographed everything. Everything. I couldn't stop. Every second was a missed opportunity if I didn't press the shutter. The man turned his gaze from the landscape and looked directly at me. In his face, I saw the lines of a man in his 50s whose skin was tanned by sun, the skin of someone who'd spent much time outdoors. "Then one day I woke up," he continued, "and I realized I'd known the Alps for 20 years, but I couldn't remember a single climb. Everything was through the viewfinder. Everything was an image, never a moment. That's a strange problem, isn't it? He laughed quietly, but not bitterly. The best tool for experiencing the world became the best tool for missing it. I photograph a mountain, and while I'm photographing it, I'm not at the mountain. I'm in my imagination of how the image will look later. I'm always a moment too late. The lake sparkled like broken glass. Some places on the water were so bright it hurt to look at. The photographer stared at it, and I saw his hands clench. Not to photograph, but like a suppressed movement. "This is Zurich Lake," he said. "One of the places I've photographed most often. And yet, I can hardly remember what it feels like. Only how it looks in the pictures." I asked him when he stopped photographing. "Didn't stop," he said. "Just slowed down. 2 years ago, I resolved not to take a single picture for a month. Not one. Just look. Just be." His eyes became bright as he said this. For the first time in 20 years, I could really experience a place without a lens mediating it. "What changed?" I asked. "Everything," said the photographer simply. "And nothing. The mountains look the same, the lake is the same, but I see them now myself, you see. Not the image of them, not what a photograph could be. I see the sun on the water, the warmth, the movement, the detail that can't be photographed." The train rumbled through a village. I saw colored houses, a garden with flowers, a boy on a bicycle. All of it rushed past the way everything always rushes past. But the photographer didn't stare outside. He stared straight ahead, lost in thought. "The best pictures are the ones I didn't take," he said then. And those words hung in the air like questions. I tried to understand what he meant. Why are they the best if you didn't take them? The photographer turned to me. "Because they're still possible," he said. "Because they still exist in the moment, uncorrupted by expectation. A photograph is always a compromise. It's not what I saw, it's what the camera saw. But the moment itself, the moment I preserved by not photographing, that is perfect." I said nothing to that. I didn't know how to understand it, but I felt the truth in it somehow. It was like a riddle that only made sense if you stopped looking for the answer. The photographer leaned back and took a deep breath. The lake disappeared, the train entered a forest, and the sun became filtered, green and warm. "How often do you photograph now?" I asked. "Sometimes," he said. "When something compels me, when I really can't do otherwise, when the moment is so intense that I feel it would be irresponsible not to hold it." He raised his hands. "But now it's no longer a compulsion. It's a choice. And that makes the difference." The forest suddenly opened, and there was another lake, smaller, but so blue it hurt. Mountains reflected in it, upside down, as if there were two worlds, one above and one below, both equally real. The photographer looked at it, and his face didn't change. No trace of regret that he wasn't photographing. Just looking. Silence. Presence. The light danced on the water, and he let it dance. That's it. he said quietly. That's enough. We sat for a long while in silence. The landscape changed. Hills, forests, small villages with pointed church spires, lakes that appeared between the trees and disappeared again like memories of something you can't quite grasp. A stream gleamed beside the tracks, narrow and swift. The Glarus Alps began to appear in the distance, white and far, and so large they didn't look quite real. The photographer stared unwavering out the window, and his camera rested still at his neck. It didn't need to be used. It was simply there, as a possibility, as an old tool he knew without needing any more. Glarus? I asked, seeing the sign slip past. The man nodded. My last assignment was a book about the Glarus Alps, he said. That was 2 years ago. Back then I still photographed. Hundreds of pictures, thousands perhaps. I can't remember exactly. But do you know what the best picture was? I shook my head. The best picture was when I stopped photographing and simply sat at that mountain and the sun set, and I didn't use the camera. The picture exists only in me now. The train began to reduce its speed. We were approaching Glarus. The photographer stood and pulled a small bag from the luggage rack. His movements were slow, intentional. He sat back down and looked at me. It was different from before, as if he was deciding something. He slowly raised the camera, and my heart skipped. Would he photograph me? But no. The camera slowly lowered again. He smiled and nodded to me, a nod that said everything. He hadn't photographed me, but seen me, and that was enough. That was more than enough. The train stopped, and the photographer gathered his things. He stood up, and before he left, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "Thank you," he said, "for listening." I watched him go across the platform, the old Leica around his neck, his hands in his pockets, his gaze on the mountains. He didn't raise the camera once. He was simply there, present, alive. I leaned back against the window and closed my eyes. The Alps were very close now, very large. And as I drifted away, I still thought about all the moments in my life I'd tried to hold. Not with a camera, but with my memory, my words, my understanding. How often have I tried to hold a moment instead of simply living it? How often have I lost it already in the effort to preserve it? And in my thoughts were the mountains, still and large and real, and nowhere glass or lens between, just pure seeing, pure being, and my breath became shallow and long, and the world grew warm. It was a hot July afternoon when I boarded in Verona the train that was supposed to go to Bolzano. The journey would take me out of the Italian plains, up into the Dolomites, up out of the heat, up out of the flatness, into the mountains. I collapsed into my compartment, relieved by the air conditioning, when a young girl came in, perhaps 20, with wild hair and a large black sketchbook under her arm. She sat across from me without acknowledging me and began to draw immediately. I watched her from the corner of my eye. The sketchbook was large and heavy, and she held a pencil. No, several, one after another, all worn down to short stubs. She drew with a speed that astonished me. Not hurried, but direct, confident, like someone who drew the way I breathed. Her fingers were smudged with charcoal, everywhere, right to the nails. A mark on her cheek as if she'd touched her face while thinking. The train began to move. The Rona disappeared. We drove through the Adige Plain, one of the flattest, hottest regions of Italy. The heat hovered over the fields. But the girl wasn't drawing the plane. She was drawing the baggage rack handle, the crooked lines, the way the fabric was fastened to it. Detail after detail, completely absorbed. I couldn't help myself. I had to ask, "What are you drawing?" She lifted her gaze as if waking from a dream. "The rack handle," she said, as if that explained everything. She had an accent, not strong but South Tyrolean, that South Tyrolean German with its soft, almost Italian sound. "I'm an art student in Bolzano, and I don't draw what's beautiful. I draw what people overlook." The girl held up her book. The handle wasn't simply drawn. It was made with such accuracy and love that I could almost feel the fabric, the moisture in the air, the marks of wear. "Beauty draws itself," she explained. "Anyone can draw a mountain, a lake, a person. But this handle, nobody sees it. And when you draw it, suddenly it's real. Then it exists." She turned back to her book and began to draw. Now the window frame. No, wait, not the window frame, but the gap between the separate panes, where the frame meets the glass. The invisible gap that holds everything together. Her hand moved quickly and fluidly, and I could see this was no practice, but pure joy in seeing, in observing, in drawing what is invisible. "What's your name?" I asked. "Lucia," she said without looking up. "And you?" "Just an old man on a train journey," I said. And she laughed. It was a real laugh, lighting her whole face. "An old man who listens," she said. "That's rare." She turned back to her book. Now she was drawing something new, a fly sitting on the window pane. No simplification, no artistic interpretation. An exact, anatomical drawing of a fly. "Why a fly?" I asked. "Everyone dislikes them," said Lucia. "Everyone says flies are ugly, troublesome. But look at it." She turned the book so I could see. The fly was beautiful. The complexity of the eyes, the texture of the wings, the tiny hairs on the legs. All things are beautiful if you really look at them. You just need to be an artist. An artist sees without prejudice. The train began slowly to gain altitude. We left the flat plain. The landscape began to roll. Hills appeared. Then they became vineyards, row after row of vines in the heat, ordered and perfect. Lucia watched the landscape for a moment, then turned back to her sketchbook. She drew a single grape, not whole, just a section where you could see the skin, the tiny speckles, the way the heat played on it. "Tell me about yourself," I asked. Lucia sighed and set down her pencil, though only for a moment. "I grew up in Bolzano," she said. "My mother is South Tyrolean, my father is Italian. In my house, 2 languages are spoken, 2 cultures, 2 ways of seeing, and each language sees the world differently. German is geometric, Italian is round. That taught me a lot as a child, that there are always multiple ways to see something." She began to draw again, automatically now, without really thinking. The hand moved from habit. That's why I draw, she continued. Because drawing is a language that needs no words. A detail is a detail, whether you speak German or Italian. Shadow is shadow. A line is a line. And in this simplicity, I find truth. The train climbed higher. We passed apple plantations now, endless rows of fruit trees in the South Tyrolean heat. Apples hung heavily on the branches. Lucia drew a single apple, the stem, the spot where the stigma still clung, the slight asymmetry, the perfect imperfection. South Tyrol is such a place, she said. Everywhere this order, the apple plantations, the vineyards, everything so organized. But the beauty doesn't lie in the order itself, but in the details that hold the order together. I noticed I was growing tired, but in a good way. The heat, the rhythmic motion of the train, the monotonous landscape, it all worked like a sleeping tablet. But Lucia's presence kept me awake. She was so alive, so focused, so completely present in this moment. I admired that about young people sometimes, this ability to be completely absorbed. What would you draw if you only had one page left? Lucia suddenly asked. I looked at her in surprise. The question came from nowhere, but also not. It was the result of her thinking. Only one page? For the whole world? I thought about it. Minutes passed. I don't know, I admitted. That's a terribly difficult question. Right, said Lucia and nodded. And that's why I like this question. The answer tells you who you are. And if you have no answer, it means you haven't yet learned who you are. Or perhaps it means you love too much to choose. She wrote something on the page, hidden so I couldn't see. My answer would change tomorrow. That's why I have a sketchbook, to preserve all answers, all versions of myself. The train approached Bolzano. The mountains grew larger, closer, everywhere. The Dolomites opened like an embrace. Lucia was still focused on her book, but now she was drawing faster, as if she knew the journey was ending. She was drawing the mountains, yes, but not the whole range. Only a single slope, only the way the rock breaks, how vegetation grows in, how time and nature work together to heal a scar. I noticed I was nodding, that my head was growing heavier. The heat, the journey, the conversation, it all affected me. My eyes grew heavy. I leaned against the window. The last thought before I fell asleep was the truth in Lucia's question. What would I draw if I only had one page? And I still had no answer. Some time later, minutes or hours I couldn't say, I half woke. My eyes were heavy, but not quite closed. Through the sleep, I saw Lucia still drawing, but now she wasn't drawing the landscape or the details of the train. She was drawing me. My head resting against the window, my closed eyes, my lips half open. She was drawing me with loving accuracy, with the same attention she'd given the fly, the grape, the apple. And it was strange. Sinking into my half-waking state, I felt completely worthy of love, completely worthy of being drawn, completely worthy of being seen. I smiled, I think, or perhaps I dreamed that I smiled. Lucia just caught me looking and smiled back, secretly, and then turned back to her book, continued drawing, drew this moment, not with a camera, but with her hand, her heart, her attention. And I drifted off again, deeper now, into a sleep that felt like flying, like details, like invisible things that are nonetheless real, that can nonetheless be seen, that are worth drawing. And Lucia's hand was still at work, still drawing, still seeing. And the mountains rolled past, and I was warm and safe and seen. And far away I heard the voices on the Bolzano station platform, and I felt the train slow. But I couldn't wake, didn't want to wake, wanted to stay in this moment, where I was part of Lucia's sketchbook, where my face was held with charcoal and love, forever young and old at once, safe in the lines of her hand. It was an October afternoon, grey and cool, when I stepped onto the train to Bebra. The Fulda route was to take me through the wooded hills of Hesse, along the Fulda River, through a landscape gripped by autumn. I'd hardly boarded before I noticed the man. Compact, strong, with eyes that were lively and alert. In his eyebrows and in the lines round his eyes was wood dust visible, fine, golden dust that had nestled into every detail of his face. "Grüß Gott," said the man, and smiled warmly. His accent was Franconian, warm and direct. He held a cloth bag before him, which he set carefully on his lap. I saw at once that this bag contained something precious, not valuable in money, but in time, in work, in attention. The man told me later, "I'm a wood turner, a woodworker, and here I have a few pieces with me. I sold them at markets." Without ceremony, he unwrapped the bag. First came a small wooden bowl, dark brown, smooth as silk. Then a second, rounder and flatter. Then a handmade spindle, a wooden spinning top with numbers, a small wooden egg, all perfectly formed, all as smooth as pebbles in a river. "This is what I do," he said simply. "On the lathe. The machine turns the wood, and I hold the chisel against it, and slowly the form reveals itself." I asked how long he'd been doing this. 36 years, he said. 36 years, every day the same, only different. The machine turns, I observe. The form waits in the wood to be discovered. My work is not to create something. My work is to remove the things that don't belong. The form is already there. I just remove what doesn't belong. The turner held the small wooden bowl against the light of the window. Autumn shone through the wood. It wasn't completely opaque, had a warmth, a depth. "That's the secret," he said. "Years ago I went about it like a fool. I wanted to be perfect, completely smooth, completely symmetrical. And then I started making mistakes. And one day I understood. Mistakes aren't the opposite of beauty. Mistakes are the beauty." I asked what mistake he meant. The turner set the bowl aside and pulled another piece from the bag. This piece was different. It was a bowl, yes, but not complete. It was broken, apparently during work. 2 pieces, no longer joined, but laid beside each other so you could see where the crack was. "This was a large bowl," he explained. "Oak, thick wood. I was almost finished. The form was nearly perfect. And then, in the last moment, the wood split. Just split. As if it were telling me, no, that's enough now. "What did you do?" I asked. The turner took the two pieces and held them up. "The first time, I wept," he said honestly. "I was young, and I needed the sails, and I was just about to finish. But then, I'm not sure when that was, I started looking at the crack, really looking at it. And it wasn't ugly. The crack was part of the story. The wood had made its judgment." I didn't quite understand what he meant, but I felt it was important. The turner saw my face and laughed quietly. "I know it sounds mad," he said, "but that's the truth about wood. Wood is not dead matter. Wood was once alive, a tree, and even when it's felled, it keeps a kind of life, a kind of memory. It remembers rain, sun, wind, and sometimes the wood tells me when enough is enough." The train was now climbing higher into the hills. The Fulda was visible, dark grey and peaceful around us. The forest was golden and red, leaves falling slowly, one after another. It was one of those moments where beauty and sadness touch. The turner stared out and sighed. "This is autumn," he said. "This is when nature says, it's time to let go. It's time to forgive. And that's my work too. Letting go." I asked him how much longer he'd work. "Until I can't anymore," said the turner. "My hands are growing old. I see it. Arthritis is coming, slowly but surely. I have perhaps 10 more years, perhaps 15, and then my hands won't be able to do this anymore. And that's all right. Everything ends. Everything is let go." He packed his things slowly away again, each piece carefully wrapped. The broken bowl, the complete bowls, the spinning tops, the wooden egg. "I keep this," he said of the broken bowl. "It sits on my shelf, almost 30 years now. And every time I look at it, it reminds me of something. It reminds me that perfection is not the goal, that injury is part of life, that the most beautiful things are born in the break." The turner leaned back in his seat. I saw him look at his hands, large, broad hands, with scars, with age, with wear. Hands that had turned wood their whole life. Hands that knew what wood was, what life was, what loss was. "My wife told me a few years ago," he said after a while, "that I'm used up, that I'm worn out like my tools. And I understood. She's right. But that's not bad. That's just life. We all get worn out. And in that wearing, something new becomes visible." The train passed through a village, street signs, names I didn't know, old half-timbered houses, gardens with autumn flowers. The turner closed his eyes and leaned his head against the window. I saw his body relax, saw the tension flow from his shoulders. The smell of linseed oil still clung to him, the smell of his work, his presence, his time on this earth. I settled back and watched him. He wasn't really sleeping, but he wasn't quite awake. In that space in between where the body rests and the mind still wanders. In his relaxed hands, I saw the posture of a man who'd done his whole life what he was supposed to do, who'd listened his whole life to the wood, to the machine, to the form emerging from chaos. I asked him quietly if he thought of taking an apprentice. He opened his eyes and shook his head. "No," he said. "The time for that is past. Young people, they don't want to learn what I know. They want quick results. But that's not how wood works. Wood teaches you patience. Wood teaches you humility. And you can't learn these lessons on video." The turner pulled one more thing from his bag. A wooden egg, unfinished. The top half was smooth and perfectly formed, but the bottom half was rough, unfinished. "This is what I'm working on right now," he said. "An egg, the symbol of beginning. But I won't finish it. I feel that the egg is telling me to leave it this way, unfinished, full of possibility. And if one day I'm no longer here, perhaps someone else will find this egg and understand what it means." The turner closed his eyes again, and this time, I think, he really did fall asleep. In his hand, he held the unfinished egg, and his breathing became slow and deep and regular. The world outside the window grew darker. The sun tilted toward the horizon. The smell of linseed oil and wood dust hovered around him like an aura, like a blessing, like the physical manifestation of a life well lived. And I drifted away into a sleep that felt like wood, worn and soft and true. And I could hear the lathe turning the wood, and the chisel revealing form from chaos, and the smell of sawdust and linseed oil, and an old, sure hand that still knew how to let go, how to trust. You know that feeling when someone walks into a train carriage and you know at once that this person breathes different air than everyone else, that he comes from another world? That's how it was with the man I met on that autumn evening on the route from Ravensburg to Memmingen. It was mid-October, the time when leaves start to fall and the air itself becomes something ethereal, something you can't quite grasp, only feel. He sat across from me, and his hands... forgive me for making such a fuss about hands, but his hands were the first thing I noticed. Not rough, not scarred like those of a craftsman I'd known my whole life, but smooth, yet somehow swollen from constant proximity to water. Smooth from all those years of touch. A man probably in his mid-40s, with a serious face, with grey streaks emanating from his temples, like roots of an old tree that grows for a long time. He held on his lap an old cardboard box with something that smelled of damp leaf. I know this smell exactly. It's not the smell of printed paper, the dead smell from storage halls, cold and sealed. No, it was something alive, something that still breathed. And then he said it, so quietly I had to lean forward. I just came from the paper mill, the last batch before winter, the most important batch. He didn't say it proudly, just firmly, just the way you'd say, I just got up, or I had a coffee. But you knew it wasn't the same. I asked him what was supposed to be special about this last batch, this last work before the long stillness of winter. Then he leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment, as if he had to concentrate to find the right words. That was interesting. He wasn't thinking. He was remembering. It was something quite different. He said, "You don't know what it is until it happens. The moment when the sheet forms. This second, this 1 second when the fiber stops swimming and starts breathing. The water leaves it, but not hard, not with force, not dry. No, softly. It becomes soft, like a breath. That's the secret no one understands. That's what I've learned in 40 years." He opened the box, then carefully, as if he might wake a child, and showed me a couple of sheets that he took out gently. They were cream white, almost like the bones of something very old and very delicate, or like the skin of a newborn bird. And I suddenly understood that he didn't speak like a paper manufacturer, not like someone fulfilling a function. He spoke like someone in love, with paper, with the water in it, with the fiber that can't see but knows everything. His fingers lifted a sheet slowly, with a gentleness I rarely see in men. And he said, his voice grew even softer, "Feel it. Just feel it, what it tells you. Don't think. Feel." I touched it then, carefully, and it was truly strange. It was light, but heavy at the same time. You knew there was weight, but not the weight that pulls you down, that presses you to the ground. A different weight. The weight of patience. The weight of continuity. The weight of something that took a long time to become, that is slow, that cannot be rushed. It breathed beneath my fingertips. And then he told me about his days in the mill, about his decades there. Not many words, you understand, but sentences that were like music, the symphony of a paper mill. The sound of water when it separates the fibers, that gentle rushing sound that sounds like an old melody. The squeaking of the great roller as it turns, slowly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The hiss when the new sheet is lifted from the felt and touches air for the first time truly, breathes and lives outside the water, becomes freer. He said, "After 40 years, I still hear this sound, and my heart beats faster. That's not normal, is it? That's not normal for someone who does, every single day, the same thing, day after day, year after year, 4 decades. But for me, it's not the same. Never the same. The water is not the same. The light through the window is not the same. The smell of the fibers is not the same. The fiber thinks differently depending on whether autumn is coming or going, whether it's getting cold or hot, whether the sun shines brightly or rain falls." I asked him then if he had a family, if there was someone who understood this, his way of seeing the world, seeing infinite patience in the fibers. If there was someone who lived with him in this world of slowness, who understood the rhythms. He laughed quietly, an echo that came only from the deepest part of his belly. It wasn't sad laughter, no. It was the laughter of someone who knows the question is important, that it's well meant, but also the answer would be wrong no matter how he phrased it, no matter what words he used. He simply said, "I have the mill, That's my family. We grow up together, we age together, we grow tired together. That's enough. More than enough. We sat then for a long time in silence, while the train gently rocked us back and forth, like a great child in a cradle. It wasn't the silence of two strangers with nothing to say. It was the silence of people who understand each other, although they hardly know each other. He sat very still, almost motionless, but not tense. His hands rested on the box with the sheets, and now and then they moved, as if they were forming something. Not the fibers in his hands, but something invisible, something fleeting, something only he could see, only he could remember. It was the movement of someone whose body can't stop working, even when his mind rests, even when his body grows tired. His fingers traced in the air the contour of something beautiful, of something that came into being in the space between us. After about an hour, after the landscape had flown past and the villages had slept, I saw that he fell asleep. The eyes closed like doors that close slowly, without sound, without drama. Just closed, the way water flows into a mill. And his hands, ah, dear God, his hands kept making that movement, up and down, together, apart, together, forming, still forming even in sleep. The movement came from deep inside, from something deeper than the mind, deeper than conscious thoughts. It came from the body's memory of 40 years. And I sat there and watched him dream of his water and his fibers and all the sounds that no one else hears, that only he understands. The music of the mill. And suddenly it was clear to me, you understand, that this man didn't just make paper. No, he lived in the paper. He'd become part of it, the way a tree becomes part of the wood that's cut from it, the way the fiber is part of the sheet it forms, the way water is part of the air when it evaporates. We travelled on to Memmingen, and the autumn outside grew darker and darker, like a dream that becomes aware of its own depth. The lights of the villages passed by like little hopes, like little lights in the homes we left behind. And this man, this quiet papermaker with his smooth hands and grey hair, slept on, his hands moving like waves in water, like life itself, which must keep moving to exist. And I knew I would never forget this scene, these gentle hands, this love for something so simple, and at the same time so impossible to understand, like a sheet of paper, like the silence in a mill, like the breath of water forming through fibers. There are people who enter a space, and you notice at once that they weigh less than others. Not physically, you understand, not in kilograms and pounds, but somehow lighter, freer, as if they'd set down something enormous. The woman boarded in Breslau on a spring evening, on the night train to Krakow, and she carried exactly one suitcase. Small. Not small like carry-on luggage you take everywhere, but small like a decision you've made. Small like the essence of something important. She was perhaps 32, early 30s, with dark hair that she'd simply plaited into a loose braid. Not like someone who stands before a mirror first and plans and wonders. She sat diagonally across from me and laid the suitcase under her seat the way you'd tuck a child under a blanket, with a gentleness I noticed immediately. I'm not someone who watches strangers boarding like a detective collecting questions. But this woman, you noticed her. It was impossible not to. She carried neither a handbag nor a rucksack, no plastic bags with provisions, no frayed bags full of life. Just this one suitcase and a small cotton bag, simply made, probably hand-woven, which likely contained everything important you need on a night train. A book, water, perhaps a journal, perhaps clothes for a week. The kind of woman who knew that less is sometimes the whole truth, that less can say more than the whole mountain of things others carry with them. The train started, and I saw her look out the window for a long time. Not forward, not to the future, but back. She turned her head to see the city we were leaving. Breslau disappeared into the darkness, slowly, street by street, window by window, until it was only a silhouette. And her eyes followed it like a child waving goodbye to a good friend. But she didn't wave. She just stared, still, very still. And I wondered what she was leaving, what she left behind. Not curious like a stranger gathering gossip and stories, but understanding. I knew this look. I'd seen it before, in my own eyes. After a while she spoke. Not to me, but to the night, to the dark air. She said, so quietly I had to strain to hear, I left everything. Everything. Really everything. And the interesting thing was that she didn't sound sad. No, she sounded light. She sounded the way you sound when you set down a very great weight you've carried for years, and suddenly you can breathe again. Suddenly air can flow into your lungs again. I asked her if she regretted it, if she was afraid of this decision, and she shook her head, still looking out the window at the darkness. She said, that was the question I asked myself for a year. Every morning before I got up, every evening before I fell asleep. Do I regret this? Do I miss it? And one day the answer was simply there. No. Not a trace of no. Not even a whisper of regret. Just no. I wanted to know what she'd left there. A job? A man? A life that wasn't really hers? A family that didn't understand her? And she answered all my unasked questions at once, the way people do when they've been silent long enough, when it's time to finally speak what's damn important. She said, I left a good job. Work with security, with good pay. Boring like a cleaner who polishes the same corner every day, always making the same movements. My boss was nice, always polite, always respectful. But that was exactly the problem. Everything was nice. Everything was orderly and proper. Everything was right. Perfect, you might say. And I was choking on the rightness. I couldn't breathe in this world that was built for me. She pointed at her suitcase under the seat, that small suitcase containing everything. She said, that's all. That's all I needed to understand that I didn't need what I had. Not really. I didn't leave a family. That would be a different story. No passion, no dream I destroyed. No. Just the habit of living my life the way others would have lived it. The way you're supposed to. The way it's expected. The way it's safe. And then one morning, One morning I woke up and I knew with a clarity I'd never felt before that half my life was over, or soon would be, if I didn't do something really terrible, really possible, really mine. She looked at me directly for the first time, really looked. Her eyes were very clear, not expressive like an actress playing a role, but simply very present, very alive, very in this moment. She didn't ask me who I was, or where I was going, or why I sat alone. She asked me something far more intimate. She asked me, "Have you loved your life, all your years, all these decades, or did you just pass the time? Did you just let the minutes count away, day after day?" It was an odd question from a stranger, absolutely unusual, but it wasn't impolite. It was just curious. So profoundly curious, like someone who's just realized that most people don't really know how to live, that they only exist. I didn't answer her right away. I couldn't, I thought, for a long time. And she looked back out at the night, at this black, infinite night, and said quietly, "You don't need to answer. I see it in your eyes. I see it clearly. You already know. You know that you've lived some life, that you've existed in a world. But you don't know anymore if it was really yours, if you chose it, or if it was just given. And that's okay. That was me a week ago. Just a week ago. Only 7 days since I left my apartment, gave up my good job, the security, called my friends and said, "I'm going. I'm leaving it all." Without explaining, without a plan, without knowing exactly where I'm going, who I'll be. We talked for several more hours then, but not particularly much. Sometimes speaking isn't the most important thing. Sometimes presence is more important than words. What mattered was that she sat next to me, this light woman with her one suitcase, this tiny cassette of all her hopes, and showed me it was possible, that it could be done. To set down the whole weight you've carried for years, to leave the old behind, to leave habit, to leave rightness behind. The train rocked us back and forth, and I kept seeing her look to the window, but not back. No, this time she wasn't looking back. I saw it clearly. She was looking straight ahead into the black night, in the direction she was traveling, in the direction of Krakow, in the direction she'd chosen herself. As we approached Krakow, in those last hours of night, shortly before morning begins to dawn, she told me she would work there. Something with translation, probably, or perhaps teaching children. She didn't yet know. She had no firm offer. That was the most striking thing about this woman. She didn't really know how it would continue, and that was absolutely all right with her. It didn't bother her. It didn't frighten her. She smiled, not broadly like someone playing, just calmly, just surely. She said, "The best thing is when you don't know what comes, when your life isn't planned like a train schedule. Then you really see it. Then you really live it." The train pulled slowly into the station, and the city's lights began to blink at the horizon like a greeting. Krakow. She stood, took her suitcase from under the seat, took her little cotton bag, everything she owned. And then she did something I remember to this day, to this moment, in this night. She didn't turn back. She didn't look at my face to see if I'd understood, if I respected her decision. She didn't look back at her seat, not back at the train, as if this place could ever have held her. She simply set off, with that one suitcase, with this lightness, with this new life. She walked out into the crack-off night and became a silhouette at once, and then something completely invisible. Just her footsteps on the platform, always further away, into the future she'd made herself. And I sat there, in my seat, in this empty compartment, and I thought, this is courage. This is not a story of someone who won everything, who got everything right. This is a story of someone who let everything go, who sacrificed security, who gave up predictability, who jumped into uncertainty and didn't even look down. And that was the only gain she needed, the only real wealth, the freedom to choose herself, every morning anew.